Hello, Steve. It's been a while since we've met. I see you got a fish bowl of wine there. Cheers.
You look like you're drinking bourbon or something there. What are you drinking?
It's just apple juice. Pulp.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Ick. Listen, did you know that the definition of a power struggle is when your boss has the power and you have the struggle?
Yes. Oh, I know that only too well, Mark.
Yes.
I know that only too well.
You own a business.
I do.
You exhibit leadership, and you have talked about leadership when you were giving advice to the government. And just your general swagger, it just literally exudes leadership.
I don't think so.
I wasn't going to say that, but yeah, I would say you do. We've had a period in history where after, I think, about almost 11 years, the Pope has just passed away. And he was the leader of a lot of people on the planet. The one that's comparable in terms of potential oomph is Tyrannosaurus Trump.
You just can't get away from this man, can you?
No. There's a T-shirt. It says Tyrannosaurus, and it's got a tyrant with Trump's hairstyle on top. It's hilarious.
Oh, funny.
Interesting that people are now comparing the style of leadership with one and the other. Can we do that? So, should we do so? What do you think?
Oh, my word. I think the only similarity between the Pope and any president or prime minister or king or queen or anything like that is the Pope is deemed to be a head of state, in so much as the Vatican is its own country, isn't it? So he's actually a head of state.
Yeah,
so I think that's where the similarity starts and ends, because the Pope draws his authority from somewhere very different to the government elected leader. The core values and vision of the Pope is very different from the core values and vision of a prime minister, a president, or even a king and queen.
Yes, but I am interested in leadership style rather than who they are.
So the leadership style is drawn from where your core value and vision starts. So I think that's where your leadership style will flow out of and grow out of. Because the papacy has a very different core value and vision foundation, the leadership style that rises up from that should, and it certainly hasn't throughout history if you read about your popes,
The Borgias.
but it should be very different. So when you look at Pope Francis compared to, I love that, Tyrannosaurus Trump, I love that. When you look at Pope Francis, his leadership style is very much that of servant leadership, moral universality, whereas Trump and his leadership style would be grow up from a populist executive type of model, rooted in national interest and almost a cult of personality, personal authority.
And chaos.
Yeah, so straight away you're looking at almost diametrically opposed styles, servant leadership and populist executive, I would have thought. And I think that makes a very big difference to everything else that then flows on from there.
What was interesting, when he first came to power, Trump, Francis said, reject hate, discrimination, or exclusion. And Trump, he said it's a disgrace that he said so, that no faith-based leader should talk such words about a person in charge. When he came in the second time, Francis offered prayers and said that Almighty God will grant you wisdom, strength, and protection in the exercise of your high duties. At the same time, as our human family faces numerous challenges, not to mention the scourge of war, I also ask God to guide your efforts in promoting peace and reconciliation among peoples.
Yep.
Could you imagine Trump saying that?
No, but that's not. But why would Trump say that? Because that's not where his core value and vision flows from. He wouldn't be drawing from that source. I would expect the Pope to say that. I don't think the Pope is right to have criticised Trump to start with. He should have prayed that prayer to start with.
Yeah.
And that prayer is what you would expect the Pope to do, that you would expect the Pope to emphasise compassion, to emphasise mercy, to dialogue with people and get involved in that rather than straight into the whole judgment and exclusion. Because Trump is all about strong, isn't he? Strong thinking, strong national borders, being the leader of the free world and the commander-in-chief. Whereas the Pope, well, he's like, hang about a minute, let's just chill out a bit here. Let's take a chill pill, calm the farm. Let's just calm the farm. Let's sit down, let's talk about this, let's dialogue. And his whole leadership style is different, drawn from very different values. A very different well he draws from, or at least he should.
Do you think that they can be compared? And is it fair to say, is there things that both should adopt from the other?
I think that to compare would not be right. To contrast would be better.
Okay.
If that makes sense. It makes sense to me in my head. Who knows, mate, what goes on in there. But I think to do a contrast between them and say, look, this is the style of one, this is the style of the other. But you've got to understand where it's from. But you know what, mate? You can always learn from somebody. You could even learn from some of the stuff that Donald Trump does. Not everything he does is stupid. You can always learn.
Absolutely, I agree.
But the problem is people like Mr. Trump may not be so quick to learn from people like the Pope, because Trump could also learn from the Pope. Trump could also learn from servant leadership. He could also learn some great skills from that. And I must admit that I probably have a leaning towards Pope Francis in all of this, because my style of leadership is very much servant leadership. I believe that my job has always been to build other people up around me, to help them, to progress them. And I use the position that I have got for the benefit of them, not so much for my benefit. My benefit is being in that position. What a great privilege that is. I was speaking to the Return Services Association the other day. They asked me to do a little presentation on a couple of days back. And I said to them, one of the things that struck me with our old Queen was her service. And one of the things she said is that to serve is an honour, it is not a sacrifice. And so when you start to see your role as an absolute honour, what a privilege it is to elevate people. Servant leadership becomes such a wonderfully empowering model, and you tend to leave things in a better place. Whereas other times, if you go along with this whole populist executive type model, you tend to smash and grab and run out the door type of thing.
There was a piece in the Atlantic magazine which someone made a comment on, and unfortunately I've lost who that is, but I'm going to read their words, not mine. And apologies, Steve, there's 3 paragraphs here. Pope Francis elevated those societies often shunned: the poor, migrants, prisoners, people with disabilities, especially, it seemed, children. He spoke about such issues such as climate change and immigration, ones that most affect the dispossessed. He welcomed LGBTQ Catholics and clarified Catholic teachings on the death penalty, making opposition to it an absolute. In contrast, the billionaires with a front row seat to Trump's inauguration reveal his priorities. Trump himself, in a recent interview, and this is in the Atlantic, reveled in how he has brought the high-powered to heel. Quote, "It's just a higher level of respect. I don't know," end quote, Trump said. President Trump has embraced power and the powerful, and many Americans have followed his lead. It makes perfect sense that Elon Musk, the president's, well, is he now the right-hand man? He seems to be stepping back. And the heedless slayer of government programs believes, as he said, quote, "The fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy." End quote. That's an interesting comparison, whatever you want to call it. On one side, you've got leadership, as you said, service and thinking of others. The other, it's power with a very cold face.
Turn the clock back 2,000 years. We had this young Jewish man from Nazareth walking around, standing in contrast to the Roman power. We have the vicar of Christ, i.e. the Pope, who is supposed to be Christ's representative on earth. He should be standing in contrast to the power of the day, whatever that power is. And he should be able to influence it, and he should be able to influence the world, because, as I say, it goes back to where he draws his strengths and his sources from that well. And the communication style of the Pope should be fundamentally different from the communication style of Trump. And I would like to think it should be softer. It should be more inclusive. It should put more emphasis on building bridges rather than building walls. It should do, because he's representing something far bigger than himself. Trump is representing himself as, this is who I am. I've been voted
that's
to be.
That's the problem. It's not representing others.
I have been voted in by the American people to carry out a certain mandate, and I'm going to smash through it. So his language, his communication style, rather than being nuanced, rather than being pastoral, rather than being sensitive, like Pope Francis speaks, his is direct, it's confrontational, it's emotive, it's all of that sort of stuff. And when he gets onto social media, it's often quick draw McGraw, very, very, very impulsive, and quite clearly, I think, deliberately polarizing. His communication style will appeal to a certain public spectacle.
So one obviously elevated the powerless, the other embraces power. And when Trump put out an image of himself as the Pope, you can see why it caused a lot of, well, I don't know what the right word, I wouldn't say concern, disgust, because I don't know, I've not read it, but Catholics worldwide I don't seem to be happy with it.
No, and it's a stupid thing to do. I mean, what politician would do that? Really? But then again, it's like Justin Trudeau doing blackface. It's like all of these other things. Prince Harry dressing up as a Nazi officer. These are meant to be stupid, frivolous things that actually hold far more weight than they probably should have. And I'm not saying that you should go off and do these things. That's not what I'm saying. But our reaction to them, rather than looking at them and going, "What a prick," and walk away, we go, "Oh my goodness, he now wants to be the Pope." And then we get ourselves in a stew about it.
I can't speak for everyone, and potentially I can't speak for myself because I've not really formulated my ideas. I've always felt slightly uneasy because I've worked with adults back in the 80s, early 90s, we said, with learning difficulties, neurologically diverse now. But when you get the soon-to-be president for the first time famously going, he spoke to someone obviously with a learning difficulty, "Oh, I don't know," and his arms were shaking, and the whole audience were laughing. That showed me personally a moral rot at the heart of a society that would want that kind of person representing the nation abroad. It's embarrassing. And I think the problem, what we've lost, is this empathy. There seems to be this degrading of empathy, which you would assume is not always there in any of us. You could argue that righteous anger is a way of getting rid of your empathy because you're basically not feeling for the other people that when you go in and you throw the money lenders out of the temple, that's quite an aggressive act, but it's said as righteous anger. So we're not always as empathetic as we'd like, and we all have our unguarded moments. But when it's constant and it's every day, you've got to worry that that's not showing leadership. Because if you worked for a company where the one in charge was like that, you wouldn't be happy.
But who puts these people in charge?
We do.
So why do we do it?
Because you know what I think politics has become? It's become a daytime soap.
It really has, hasn't it? It really has.
And in fact, I have to say, the one thing that Trump has been very good at is making it so it's a daily episode.
Yeah, aren't we sick of it? I mean, this is worse than for who shot...
We are, but his followers aren't.
Who shot JR,
Laura Palmer, wasn't it?
Something like that. But it's just mad. It's all mad. And I think that when you have heads of state like Pope Francis and you have Trump and you look at the comparisons, I mean, we are looking at two different ends of the spectrum here, aren't we, really? As I say, there is no comparison. There are the contrasts that we can make. And then somewhere it should be a happy medium that most people can live their life within. You talk about righteous anger with Jesus going into the temple and turning over the tables of the money changers. Righteous anger is not a bad thing. The problem that we have today is self-righteous anger. That's the problem that we have today. People are so self-righteous. They look down their nose at other people. They refuse to take the plank out of their own eye before they try and take the speck out of the other person.
So when you go back to ancient Greece, and they knew about this is half of what the Republic is about, and Plato talking, or Socrates, that he said the reason people often get into power, or should get into power if they have a good moral compass, is so that those without a moral compass don't get into power. Either we've got a very poor gene pool of politicians, or they are a reflection of a very poor gene pool of people voting for them. I don't know, but they reflect the community. And I know that we've said on our other channel, this is not necessarily going to be a shock to you. You've heard it, but I'd like to say it here. In most people in the West now, the people who are voting, a lot of them go to church. There's a shed load of churches in most Western towns and cities. If they're voting in people that are disreputable, well, they're the ones voting for them. So I'm not saying just because you happen to be religious, you shouldn't be voting for a certain type. But where's the moral or the upstanding citizens that you on a Sunday is saying you're worshipping, and yet at the same time you're voting in the exact opposite? Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense, and I think that you are lumping what you would call American evangelicals into the whole religious bucket. So I would suggest that.
Oh yeah, okay. I stand corrected because I thought we were talking about American. People,
but American evangelicals, so rather than just religious people. So American evangelicals voting in for Trump, there are probably very many American evangelicals, and as we have discussed before, there are a number of issues around what makes somebody a follower of Christ, and being an American evangelical does not necessarily cut the mustard, does it? It doth butter no parsnips sometimes. So.
So I think the third one.
Not at the moment.
It don't mash no chips.
It does mush no peas. But I think that we need to make those distinctions really when we're talking about those things. There are some very strange evangelical views around which certain politicians will pander to and will promote. And then they'll go, well, you got my vote, mate, because you're going to do this, this, and this, and I believe that as a fundamental part of my religious belief, and so therefore you're going to get my vote. And that unfortunately is the way that America is made up.
I wonder if a lot of it is because their leader is money.
Well, I do believe that one of the biggest threats that the world, humanity has, is mammon. It's the love of money. It's the spirit that sits behind money, because it motivates and drives people to do all sorts of horrible things, and using so much of your time, your energies, your efforts to just gather more and more and more for yourself, as opposed to looking around you and going, well, I've got this, aren't I fortunate? How can I use it to bless other people with?
So if we are at an inflection point in history and we now have a lot of people, probably for the first time, suddenly awake, I think we've been too many people sleepwalking through certainly the period, I would say 2010 to COVID, where if you look back at a lot of videos on YouTube, they all seem to be binary in their arguments. You get a lot of, in things that we're interested in, a lot of debates like Matt Dillahunty versus Jordan Peterson, the atheist, and it's all like, black and white, and they're all butting each other, not necessarily making any sense. And in politics, everything was getting superheated. It was all, remember Greta Thunberg? Thunberg?
Yeah.
She disappeared, didn't she?
Well, they're shooting stars, aren't they?
Yeah, but then it all changed. And slowly, as we've crept out of that black hole of COVID into, well, what we are in now, the shadow period, I think, still affects us. Are people becoming aware of, well, who you vote for has consequences. Who you see as a good leader has consequences. I don't think most people realise that, even when they came to vote for Trump for the second time.
ABCs of life, Mark. Actions bring consequences. And we have lived in society, and we have promoted a society where do what you want, when you want, how you want, and there's never going to be a consequence or any blowback or comeback from it. Well, unfortunately, that isn't reality. But we have conned people into believing that this is the type of world that we live in, where you can do whatever you want and there are no consequences to your actions. Well, unfortunately, ABCs of life. Actions bring consequences. You get what you deserve, ultimately. And that's what we're ending up with. And we are moving into a very interesting time. I think it's a very strange political landscape. I think the moral landscape is very ambiguous. I think that we are fluctuating from black to white across the shades of grey. And I don't know where we're going to stop. My suspicion is that we will clamp down on the things that we shouldn't clamp down and elevate the things that we shouldn't elevate.
Such as?
I think that we will shut down people's freedoms and rights and liberties, and we will elevate other stuff which shouldn't be elevated.
See, I wonder why, after all that had gone through with Trump in the first iteration, that at his inauguration, well-known billionaires stood there in a row. Why did they do that? Why did they stand behind an already dividing person? Because you imagine you're in charge of a massive platform, media platform. You're effectively putting the finger up to a half the population. And it's like, who would not agree with you stood there? What's in it for them? I don't get it. Do they have leverage over them? Do they want to be seen with an authoritarian? Or in the eyes of some people, an authoritarian? It's bizarre. You wouldn't see them at the funeral, for all I know. They may have gone to the funeral of Pope Francis. Perhaps they only invited statesmen and leaders. But it's like you're in one place of politics and you're not necessarily all seen in a moral sphere. And I don't understand why they do that when they could very easily, and perhaps this is what deluded them, Musk, I don't think foresaw the backlash that he was going to bring about on himself on Tesla, and the fact that they have cratered their sales. Perhaps they were naive. Perhaps they thought that they would benefit from it. I don't know.
I don't know, mate. I guess that when you look at the contrast between Pope Francis and Trump, it's all about that symbolism and the public imagery, isn't it? So with Pope Francis, he symbolises humility. That's what he would look at, the way he dressed. Look at the way he presented himself. It was humble. He lived in the guest house rather than in the papal residence itself. He washed the feet of prisoners. He
kissed their feet.
He tried to sort of get rid of all of this ostentationist stuff. You know, this way of being and this way of living. Whereas Trump projects success and strength, living the American dream, luxurious settings, all of the gold, all of the bling, the great campaigns, the rallies, all of those flashing lights and optics. You know, symbols of simplicity and humility are aligned to the Pope. Symbols of wealth and dominance are aligned to the President of the United States, and particular in this case with Donald Trump. So they stand in contrast to each other. And lots of people, because of the type of people that we have bred over the last 40 years, are people who are driven and attracted to wealth and dominance, to status, to luxury, to the gold, to all of the bling, to all of that, look at me, I am strong and I am successful. We've wired people wrong for years, mate.
Yeah.
And we are now, you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. And this is what we're coming into, I think.
So what's the solution?
For the people who profess the same type of faith and the same type of belief in the transcendent across the world, to actually project that. You know, when you have the kingdom of God, Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of God. The way that this should be best understood, in my view, is that the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, is the rule, the reign, the sovereignty of God here on earth, in contrast to the worldly powers, in order to present an alternative social reality. So the Christian way of living should be to present an alternative way of living to what we're seeing around us. So when there is all of this dominance and disruption going on, and look at me, aren't I big and strong? The Christian goes, yeah, you may well be big and strong, but what about this person here? Let's use some of that strength. Let's use some of that power that you've had to influence and better the lives of people around you. The Christians should be doing that. And people of faith, I think, broader than just the Christians, should be doing that. And it's when you start to change hearts and minds one at a time, we might see something positive come from it. But until we do that, we won't, because we're going to go around the same old mountain time and time and time again. And the definition of madness, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. We know enough now to know that this isn't going to work this way. There's got to be something better.
I agree. And I wonder if we're in the same, this is not going to be a very good analogy for one reason, is that, do you remember Betamax and VHS?
Yeah.
Which was the better system?
Betamax.
But which one won?
VHS.
Why?
Because they promoted it more. They made it more accessible. They flooded the market with it.
Okay. And that's what's happening in politics. The VHS type politics is the one that's been flooding the market, where we know that there was a better alternative and we didn't buy it. And I think there's going to have to be a complete change around there. And what originally, or what eventually got rid of VHS, was new technologies coming through, wasn't it?
Yes.
The disc.
Yeah.
And then streaming.
Yeah.
So things will naturally happen because people always want the new. Things date very, very quickly. This is what I admire about the church, how they have enabled themselves or able to constantly be relevant for centuries. But in the political sphere, if you adopt a certain style, that dates very quickly. Just look at the way politicians were speaking in Britain in the 70s, and then in the 50s, and then in the 1910s. It's completely different. So eventually we are going to see a change. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I wonder if it's happening now because we're talking about it. We know others are talking about it. He's losing, and I say he, this is Trump now. He's losing the respect of his allies. He is losing the respect of politicians or the voting public, as we've seen in Canada and Australia and potentially elsewhere. So it's starting to fade. And what's going to happen is we're going to get this empty shell making a lot of noise for however long that the system that he's over tolerates him.
And broader across the whole of the Western world. Because while they may not have a Trump-style leader, the same principles apply to the other Western nations as well. It's all about being a populist leader. It's all about being an executive actor. It's all about being provocative and polarizing and identity politics. It's all about personality being centralized. It's all about showing your strength, your wealth, your grandeur, and all of that sort of stuff. It's all about that sort of stuff. And that will, I am sure, change. And the church have a unique place to play in society, because the church should be going, yeah, okay, you fluff about with all of that stuff over there, because kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall, kings come, kings go, and God sits sovereign over the top of them. And what God is interested in is, has that person got enough to eat? Has that person got enough to feed their family? Has that person got enough to recognise that they are of intrinsic value, that they are somebody made in the imago Dei, the image of God? Is that person somebody that we can get alongside and build up and walk with? And I think that the church need to step up into what they should be doing, which is presenting that alternative social reality. So yeah, politicians are doing all of this. That's the reality. But let me give you the alternative social reality. The alternative is that we wrap around to each other in community, that we actually work well with each other, that we have this, is it a synodicy? They have like synods in the church, but there's a particular word that you can use for sort of drawing all of that sort of stuff together and
ecumenical.
Yeah, a bit like ecumenical, but it's like the collegial approach where synodality, that's it, right. where you have like this shared decision making thing. See, it's very collegial, and I think that is the wise way of doing things. But when you do that, you have nobody who is elevated, and what politicians want is to be elevated. They want to be in the limelight. They want power. And the church and people like the Pope and all the rest of it, with his stance, with the way that he is, a very deliberate reformer in the way that he did, whether you agree with him, whether you don't. Whereas you look at President Trump and contrast his style, well, he's a complete disruptor. He disrupts. Now, in that disruption, there may be reform that comes out of it. I don't know, but they are very, very, very different. Trump's focus is on America first. That's what he was elected on, and that's fine. He is the American president. The Pope is a global moral voice. 2.4 billion Catholics around the world, or wherever there are.
Yes, I agree with that. But I also think, don't forget that the president has a very global presence, because America does. I think it has military bases in nearly every country on the planet.
It does it has a huge global presence. I accept that.
So if that pulls back, if they start pulling back, what will happen to that presence? This happened to Britain. The British had an empire for a long time. It didn't realise when it ended. Generations were going on still thinking that we were preeminent. It's a bit like England winning the 1966 World Cup and then believing that they had a right to win for 30, 40 years afterwards, and they can never get their head round they weren't that good. And there was this disbelief that Johnny Foreigner kept winning. And that's, I think, what may happen to the States. They're going to have this preeminence fixed in their head that they've grown up with. Suddenly, it won't be there. And I don't think they'll be able to deal with it. Because when you're no longer respected around the world, or you're seen as the arbiter of choice to go to, when no one's holding you up as that light on the hill, as they like to speak, that's going to hurt. That's going to sting. That's going to take decades to eradicate if things change. It's sad in a way because all our lives we looked up to America.
Oh, absolutely. We lived in a great time. We are now on the cusp of a different era, I feel. I said to my wife a little while ago that I sense that there is a change coming and I don't know what it is. And this was not necessarily about politics. I have got a feeling inside of me. Sometimes I get those feelings. Before COVID, I got a feeling that and it came to me in a word and a picture. It's this, or words and picture. The storm is coming, and this was 3 months before COVID hit. The storm is coming, and I have a sense at the moment that we are on the verge of something, and I can't see it. I can't see exactly what it is, but it is going to be very, very different to what you and I have grown up with over these last 60 years. Very different. I can't piece it together, and I don't have any more prescience in it than that. But something has changed. There has been a shift, and I would obviously put that as a shift in the spiritual realm, which affects our realm around us. But there is something different. There is something different.
I felt something similar in early January, funny enough. I can't remember the date. I didn't link it to Trump coming to power or whatever. But that's another thing that most people overlook. We can sense things if they're not quite right. We do have that ability, but yeah.
So we shall see. We shall see. We are moving into a different world, mate. Where we've come from, we've had a great time. It's been fantastic. Loved it. And we're very fortunate. I will tread very carefully as we move into the future because there will be monsters.
Farewell and thanks for all the fish.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, don't get too close to the edge, mate. You fall off the rim.
Well, smoke me a kipper. I'll be back for breakfast.
Good on you, lad. Good on you. Whatever you think of Pope Francis, he was a very different sort of pope. Very, very nice. Presented as a very nice guy, and a very compassionate man. And I think overall, the legacy that he leaves will be kind to him. History will be kind to him. I think overall. Who knows what the introduction of a new pope is going to look like for the world stage? Don't underestimate the power that individual has around the globe.
Yes, especially in America now, because if the Catholics really are upset with the way Trump has tried to show an image of himself as the Pope, you only need the Pope to say something and they're going to start voting a specific way, and they're a big block of people.
Yep.
Yes, very interesting. So interesting. Well, that's the thing. You'd mentioned China earlier, the old Chinese curse, isn't it? May you live in interesting times.
That's right. It is indeed. Still,
we'll have to wait and see then.
Watch this space, mate. Watch this space. You
interesting conversation as always.
Always a pleasure, never a chore. Look after yourself. Catch you later, mate. Bye.